So, week 7, what a week it was. And here's the top 5 running backs this week in fantasy points at the running back position. And number 1 was a shocker, Jeff Wilson Jr. He had 112 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns and 2 catches for 8 yards. And what a game it was for Jr. He was running in over all the Patriot defenders. They couldn't tackle him. They couldn't stop him. The only thing that did stop him was a bad ankle injury in the end zone, and it did not look good, and Jr. got carted off, Jeff Wilson Jr. So, to me, it looks like it's a season-ending injury, or at least a multiple-week injury for Jr., but this guy, I was out there ready to pick him up, and he was a guy everyone slept on this week. We figured McKinnon and Hasty was going to get the ball, but they didn't. It was all Jeff Wilson Jr. He had all 17 carries until he got hurt. Debo and Ayuk, we saw get in there a little, but what a performance it was by Wilson Jr. with 32 fantasy points, leading all running backs. And somehow, if he's not hurt, he's going to be a number 1 priority to go out there and add, but I just can't see him being on the field for a while or in the rest of the season. But what a performance it was. Coming into the day, he was only 6% owned, and that number would have skyrocketed if he's healthy, but it just doesn't look good. But what a performance by him. The second running back of the day, of the week, was James Robinson, and he just continues to put up numbers. When they cut Leonard Fournette in the before the season started, everyone was scratching their head and saying they're definitely tanking, but they saw something we didn't. Obviously, in James Robinson, the rookie, what a performance for him versus the Los Angeles Chargers. 22 carries for $120 and 4 catches for 18 yards and a receiving touchdown and a rushing touchdown for James Robinson. He had 31 fantasy points. He started off slow, but once that second quarter hit, he was finding the holes and he was making plays, and then even a nice stretch over the end zone for his first touchdown, and then later on catching one in the flats and diving and hitting the pylon. So James Robinson, he's definitely a top 10 running back this season. He's had some great games this year, and that was his second 30-point performance of the fantasy football season. This guy, he's good for 12 to at least 12. He'll put up a game, but he's more in the 15 to 25 range most of the season. He came off of 2 mediocre games. I wasn't that confident in starting him, but I had no choice this week, and I'm lucky I did with that 31 fantasy point day. The only thing he's going on by in week 8, but then he's got a nice schedule coming up next few games, Houston and Green Bay after that. So James Robinson, the second best running back of the week, the third guy, and he's probably been the best running back all season when you put it all together, is Alvin Kamara, 23 fantasy points. He had 14 carries for 83 yards and 8 catches for 65 yards. So he put together a great scrimmage game with Kamara with no touchdowns, and he still finished with 23 fantasy points. He's a workhorse. He's the man over there. With the injuries to Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders, it still didn't matter. Kamara had his way all game yesterday versus the Carolina Panthers in a division matchup. This guy, best running back in the league. You fire him up every week. He's the number 1 back in your lineup. And now he's got Chicago and Tampa coming back. A little tougher matchups. But come on, Alvin Kamara is a beast. The fourth guy, Todd Gurley. Every week I think the other shoe's going to drop, and Gurley either get hurt or out-touched and have a bad performance. But once again, Gurley touchdowns bailing him out. He had 63 yards on 23 carries, which isn't that good, and 2 catches for 19 yards, but 2 touchdowns he had, and one of them actually cost his team the game, believe it or not. He should have just fell to the ground looking back at it now, but Gurley getting over the goal line, and then the Lions driving down with a minute left to win the game by 1. But Todd Gurley, he just keeps putting up numbers in fantasy football. And another 20-plus point performance for him when I thought the struggles were going to start happening after going for 10 points only last week. And now he's got Carolina, a good matchup coming up on Thursday night, remember. And then Denver in the bye. But Todd Gurley, the way the running backs have been this year, you just got to go run them out there. I did trade him in a league recently for Keenan Allen. But Todd Gurley, he's a top 10 back in points right now in fantasy football. And you got to keep rolling with him. So Gurley was the 4th best running back of the day of Week 7. And the 5th and final guy is Chase Edmonds. For weeks, people have been talking about him and hoping he gets the starting job. And this might have been the opening we saw for Chase Edmonds. He had a 21-point fantasy game, and he barely played until the third quarter. He ended the game with 5 carries for 58 yards and 7 catches for 87 yards. Edmonds coming in for Drake towards the end, where Drake, with a devastating ankle injury, he got carted off. We're going to get the MRI later today to see what happens with Drake. But Chase Edmonds, if he's a starter, he could be a top 10 running back the rest of the season for your team. We'll find out. And to be honest, he's probably not out there on most fantasy waiver wires. He's already 63% owned in Yahoo leagues. But Chase Edmonds, this guy's got top 10 talent, especially with his receiving skills out of the backfield. Week 8 he has a bye, then Miami and Buffalo. After that, so Chase Edmonds, if Drake is out for the season or extended amount of time, this guy, he could be up there in running back points the rest of the way. So that was the top 5 running backs in Week 7 of the fantasy football season.